Good morning, Morai Rabotai. We are continuing on Masechet Chagigah, and we are on Daf Yud Chet Amud Bet, the top Mishnah. And as we mentioned, this is going to be stepping into an entire new topic from here until the end of Masechta, discussing the laws, the basic laws of Tumah v'Tahara, and much of it is very much needed for the basic things we deal with on Netilat Yadayim, but a whole part of it is really not necessarily things that we deal with because of Kodshim and Trumah, but nevertheless, fundamental pieces of information for understanding different parts of Chumash and many Mishnayot that we have in Shas. So, we explained that there are different levels of Tum'ah. Some of them are rabbinic, some of them are Midoraita, and the Mishnah is going to discuss both of those levels. The highest level of Tum'ah, as we mentioned before, is a corpse of Avi Avot Tum'ah, and anything else that has a source of Tum'ah, generated source of Tum'ah, will be Ava Tum'ah. That's why it's called Av, right? Because it is generating the Tum'ah. For instance, Ezav is Ava Tum'ah, or even a Nevela is Ava Tum'ah. The levels of Tum'ah that are source of Tum'ah, that's Ava Tum'ah. Then something that touches them, comes in contact with them, becomes Rishon la Tum'ah. It's the first Tolada, so to speak, of the Tum'ah. And if something touches the Rishon Tum'ah, becomes Sheni, because that's the secondary Tum'ah to that. And something that touches the Sheni Tum'ah becomes Shlishi. And something that touches the Shlishi becomes Revi'i Tum'ah. And that's basically the extent of it. We don't have anything higher than, or lower than Revi'i. Now, every one of these drops a level, and only things that are more sensitive, Chazal made a gezerah, that they should become Shlishi and Revi'i. So for instance, you have regular Chulin. That means anything that's not necessarily attaining any level of Kedusha. Chulin could become only until Sheni Batumah. A food that's Chulin cannot become, or a person cannot become Shlishi Letumah. But Truma, for instance, Truma could become Shlishi Letumah. Because that's a level higher, it's a level more Kadosh, so therefore it could become even Shlishi Letumah. But it can't become Revi'i Letumah. And Kodshim, could become also Revi'i Letumah, which is the highest level, so to speak. But from there on, that's about it. You don't have Chamishi Letumah after that. So, you have person, you have food, you have Trumah, and you have Kodshim, the different levels of Tum'ah that could be in existence. Now, our Mishnah is going to deal with the rabbinic additions, because these, the Shlishi, Revi'i, Tum'ah, these are all Tum'ah midarabanan that Chazal instituted in order for us to be more careful in the laws of Tum'ah v'Tahara. Now that's one element of the Mishnah. The second element of the Mishnah we need is that Yadayim, the hands of a person, are Sheniyot la Tum'ah. Stam Yadayim, Sheniyot la Tum'ah. What does that mean? Mideoraita, from the Torah, if your hands become tameh, your entire body becomes tameh. There's no such a thing as a halfway tum'ah. You're either tameh or tahor. But midrabanan, Chazal instituted that a person's hands that you have not been watching your activities, the hands are askaniot. You touch places, you do things. You remember when COVID hit, people all of a sudden became much more mindful of where they touch. Aside from washing and sanitizing your hands many times a day, you're also careful, and you gained a mindfulness of how much before that you were just touching things without even necessarily realizing that you're shaking hands with somebody, you're touching this, you're touching that. Stam Yadayim, sheniyot latuma. Chazal made an institution that if you don't know the status of your hands, you're to assume that they are sheniyot latuma. Right? The level of not rishon latuma, but sheni latuma. Now this is midrabanan in order to ensure more tahara for the truma and the kochim, the things that people will come in contact with, as we will see. And one more piece over here, that for netilat yadayim, a person could be doing netilat yadayim, the way we do it, right? Pouring water with your hands on your other hand. That's netilat yadayim. And then you could have tvilat yadayim. You could dunk your hands, so to speak, in a mikveh tahara. And then a person that also does tvilah, like literally goes and dunks in the mikveh, also accomplishes netilat yadayim, because that's a higher level, of course. So with that preface, with that hakdama, now we can start reading our Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, notlin layadayim lechulin ul maaser velitruma ul kodesh matbilin ul chatat im nitmau yadav nitma gufo. There are three different levels. Says the Mishnah, for chulin, maaser, and teruma, when you want to eat chulin or maaser or truma, you have to do netilat yadayim. And for kodesh, if you want to eat kochim, then netilat yadayim is not sufficient. You have to do tevilat yadayim. You have to dunk your hands in a mikveh. You have to dip your hands in a mikveh tahara before you eat kochim. Of course, a person that just dunked his whole body in mikveh also would work, but you don't have to. You could just, be matbil yadayim in the mikveh, dunk your hands in the mikveh, and netilat yadayim would not be sufficient.
That's just for the kohen, obviously, right?
That's for whoever could eat teruma and kodesh, which is again not a regular Israel. It has to be a kohen. So says the Mishnah, ul chatat, for dealing with mehatat, then you need a higher level. Im nitma yadav, if your hands are tameh, then nitma gufo. We consider the entire body to have been tameh, and hence you have to go to the mikveh completely before you have any dealings with chatat. Says the Gemara now, says the Mishnah now, Taval lechulin, huchzak lechulin. If you went to mikveh, you have to have in mind why you're going to mikveh. And it works only for that and below. So therefore, if you went to the mikveh, or if you did netilat yadayim rather, for chulin, you wanted to eat your chulin, so then huchzak lechulin, it works for eating chulin, but asur lemaaser, but it does not work for maaser, because maaser is a level higher, as we will see in Chazal's assertion of different madregot. You have chulin, you have maaser, sheni, and then you have teruma, kodesh, and chatat. So says the Mishnah, if you washed your hands netilat yadayim for chulin, huchzak lechulin, but asur lemaaser. You are muchzak lechulin, you're good to go for chulin, but you're asur now to eat maaser, even though that you just did netilat yadayim 5 minutes ago. So says the Mishnah, huchzak lemaaser asur litruma. And if you did netilat yadayim for maaser, you could do maaser, you're good for maaser, but you're asur to do teruma. Every netilat yadayim, every level of tahara that you achieve is good for that level, but the mindfulness is not going to work for a level higher than that. We'll see in just a moment that the reverse works. That if you did a tahara for a higher level, it works for a lower level as well. Says the Mishnah, Taval litruma, if you dipped your hand in mikveh for truma, huchzak leteruma, but asur lakodesh. Now, even if you said, you know what, I'm not going to do just tevilat yadayim, it's easier to just jump in the mikveh. So you went to the mikveh because you said, well, I'm going to have to eat truma right now, so I may as well just do it tevilah. So you come out of the mikveh, and things evolve, and you want to now eat kochim. So you say, well, gee, it's so good because I actually just did tevilah. And for kodesh, you need tevilah. So I did tevilah. Does that work? Says the Mishnah, it doesn't work. Because you did not have a mindfulness for the higher level. You thought you're only going to do teruma, and therefore it's not good for kodesh. Huchzak le teruma, asur le kodesh, tavar le kodesh. Now, so this is tavar le maaser, huchzak le maaser, but asur le teruma. Tavar le teruma, huchzak le teruma, but asur le kodesh. Tavar le kodesh, if you did the tefillah for kodesh, huchzak le kodesh, but it's asur le hatat. You have chazakah for kodesh, but you're asur for chatat, because chatat is the highest level, dealing with me chatat of paraduma. And taval lechamur, says the Mishnah, mutar lekal. But the reverse of it works. That means if you did tevilah for something that's a higher level, tum'ah, higher level of mindfulness, of kedusha, if you prepared yourself for a higher level of kedusha, it also automatically works for lower levels, even though that you didn't have it in mind. So, therefore, if you were tover for chatat, it works for kodesh works for teruma works for maaser, and so on and so forth. Says the Mishnah.
Regardless of whether or not you're actually going to handle chatat, like what if you're only going to be handling maaser, sheni, and can you still go into the mikvah with the mindset that I'm going to be handling on the level of chatat, and then just come back and then whatever you end up doing?
Yes, correct. Because now you have the highest level of mindfulness. You're careful, and you've done the thing that is needed for chatat. You've done tevilah. So says the Mishnah, Tavar lechamur mutar lekal. Tavar velo huchzak. How about if you went to mikveh and you had no mindset, right? You went to swimming. You wanted to take a swim. What happens to be that you met all the criterias of a tevilah, right? So you had really no mindset, and you come out and they offer you something to eat, which is kodesh, which is teruma, and say, oh, that's great because I just did tevilah an hour ago. I took a swim in the sea, whatever it may be, in a mikveh. But I had the mentality I had was for just a swim. So does that work? Says the Mishnah, taval velo huchzak. If you did tevilah, but you had nothing in mind to be muchzak in something, keilu lo taval. It's 10th amount of you having not gone to mikveh altogether. Says the Mishnah, next part of the Mishnah is the dealings of the people and their interactions while being in different levels of society. In other words, there were people who always ate chulin al taharat kodesh. Even their chulin, even their regular mundane food, they always were careful to eat it al taharat kodesh. There were people that they were not careful. They were just a regular, what we call them amaretz, right? Amaretz means an ignorant person, but for our purposes, when we say amaretz, it means a person that's not careful in the laws of Tum'ah v'Tahara, so he doesn't eat his chulin al taharat kodesh, right? So says the Mishnah, Bigdei amaretz, the cloth of a amaretz, a handkerchief of a amaretz, midras leperushin, is considered a source of tum'ah for perushin, for people who are very careful to eat everything al taharat kodesh. Bigdei perushin, and a handkerchief, a beged of even a parush that's very careful to eat everything al taharat chulin al taharat kodesh, that even their mundane, regular food, a sandwich he eats with tahara, midras le'ochle teruma, is considered a source of tum'ah for someone that is ochle teruma, because teruma is a higher level than just eating chulin al taharat kodesh. Bigdei ochle teruma, and when you eat teruma, even a kohen that eats teruma, his handkerchief is a source of tumah, is a midras for kodesh. And bigdei kodesh, a person that eats kochim even, so that's what you're saying, the highest level, but even that, the handkerchief of that person is a source of tumah, is midras lechatat, for someone that's handling mechatat, which is the highest level. For instance, says the Mishnah, Yosef ben Yoezer, right, of the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot fame, Yosef ben Yoezer היה חסיד שבכהונה. He was a tremendous chassid of Kohanim. And yet, והייתה מטפחתו מדרס לקודש. He didn't eat kochim, and therefore his handkerchief, his beged, was considered a midras for people who dealt with kochim. Yochanan ben Gudgeda היה אוכל על טהרת הקודש כל ימיו. Yochanan ben Gudgeda ate al taharat kodesh. Everything he ate, he dealt with it like kochim. And yet, hayta mitpachto midras lechatat. His handkerchief would be considered a midras for someone, a source of tumah for someone that dealt with mechatat. So therefore we have all these levels. You have a amhaares, you have someone that is parush, which is careful in the laws of tumah v'tahara, and then you have a kohen who eats teruma, a person that consumes kochim, and a person that deals with mechatat, each one of them on a different level in the hierarchy of tahara and kedusha. Says the Mishnah, says the Gemara, Chulin u'maaser mi ba'i netilat yadayim. Our Mishnah starts saying, Notlin layadayim, the first line of the Mishnah. Notlin layadayim lechulin u'maaser. That you have to do netilat yadayim for chulin and for maaser. So says the Gemara, Chulin u'maaser mi ba'u netilat yadayim. You're suggesting that for consumption, for dealing, let's call it for now, for dealing with chulin and maaser, I have to do netilat yadayim. I have a source that directly indicates not like that. That maybe for teruma you have to do, maybe for kochim you have to, but for chulin and maaser you don't have to do netilat yadayim. Says the Gemara, where is this from? Urminu, I have a kasha, ha-teruma va-bikurim. The teruma and bikurim chayavin alehen mita. If somebody eats teruma and bikurim, who is not supposed to be eating those items, is chayav mita. A zar, a non-kohen that eats them b'mezid, deliberately, not b'shogeg, then becomes chayav mita, because it says umetu bo ki echaleluhu, the pasuk says. So he becomes a chayam mita, and says the Gemara, and he also has to pay chomesh. He has to pay the amount that he damaged, that he consumed, and on top of it, he has to make the kohanim whole. He has to make a chomesh on top. And says the Gemara, this is the Braita, ve'asur lezarim, and it's asur for non-kohanim, of course, to eat this. And from the moment that the teruma or bikurim was given to the kohen, it is considered the nechasim of the kohen. In other words, when a Yisrael gives teruma to a kohen, at that moment, it's not that it's my teruma, I gave it to you because I can't eat it, you could eat my teruma. That's not the pshat. It is the monetary assets of the kohen. What's the difference? The difference is, can I use this teruma to be mekadesh an isha? Right now, traditionally speaking, we use a tabat, hareat mekudeshet li b'tabat zu, but you could really do anything of monetary value. So can you give a bunch of teruma to this woman and say, hareat mekudeshet li bechitim zu, right? With this bunch of wheat. So well, it has to be your money. If it's not your money, then it becomes a source of problem, because you could only marry someone with your own money, not with somebody else's money. So therefore, says the Mishnah, this is considered the assets of the Kohen, and he could even use it for anything of his personal need. Vehen nichse Kohen, ve'olin be'echad u'me'ah, and also teruma and bikurim both are batel be'me'ah ve'echad. In other words, regularly speaking, if you have a piece of treif meat that falls into and is cooked and lost in a pot of cholent, what's the halacha? It's batel b'shishim, right? 1 in 60. By teruma is echad u'me'ah. That means you have to have 100 times more than it. So it's batel be'echad u'me'ah is nullified in 101, which means 100 times more. Ve'teunin netilat yadayim, and teruma and bikurim need netilat yadayim, and also they need haref shemesh. That means haref shemesh means what? We had this in the beginning of Masechet Brachot, that if you became tameh et tumah deoraita, not the tumah derabanan, if you became a tameh tumah deoraita, when you go to mikveh is not sufficient. You have to also wait until it becomes nighttime, and then you are tahor for teruma purposes, for bikurim purposes. So all of these are criterias of teruma and bikurim, says the Braita. And hare'elu beteruma u'bikurim. These are halachot of teruma and bikurim, ma she'en ken b'maaser, v'chol sheken b'chulin. These are halachot of teruma and bikurim. What's not true by maaser and of course chulin. So now, when you want to understand and unravel this Braita, what do you say? The Braita says, one of the things that you need for teruma and bikurim is netilat yadayim. And then at the end it says, what's not true by maaser and for sure not true by chulin. So it seems to clearly say that for maaser and for chulin, you don't need netilat yadayim. It's pretty clear. So says the Gemara, wait a second, we got a problem here. Our Mishnah says, clearly, the first line, notin liyadayim lechulin u'maaser. You have to do netilat yadayim before you deal with chulin and maaser. This other writer says that you only for teruma and bikurim need to do that. For maaser and for sure for chulin, you don't need to do netilat yadayim. So we got a problem. Says the Gemara, kashya maaser maaser, kashya chulin achulin. Now we have got a problem. Maaser and maaser and chulin. Both of the Mishnayot, both of them talk about, Mishnah and the Braita, they both talk about netilat yadayim for maaser and netilat yadayim for chulin. Our Mishnah says you need netilah for both of them. The other Braita says you don't need netilah for any of them. So says, the Gemara, Bishlama maaser maaser lo kashya. The maaser and maaser is not a question. Harabi meir v'harabanan ditran. So this was a Mishnah in Masechet Bikurim that we just learned. The Gemara brings it. Now we have another Mishnah over here in Masechet Para that discusses the halachot of Tumah v'Tahara as well, and he brings a Machloket Tanaim, Machloket Chachamim, and Rabbi Meir in regards to this topic. Kol ha'ta'un biat mayim midivrei sofrim metameh et hakodesh uposel et hateruma. So before we explain this, there are two different phraseologies that are mentioned in Tumah v'Tahara, which is important for us to know how to learn, to interpret, and to translate the Mishnayot in regards to Tumah v'Tahara. When an item becomes Tameh, a level of Tum'ah that could also make something else Tameh, we call that Metameh. And when it becomes Tameh, but it's the last step, stage, it cannot make something else Tameh, we just call that Pasul. That's just the phraseology how the Mishnah works. I give you an example. If a Truma becomes Sheni Latuma, if a Terumah becomes Sheni Latuma, that Terumah just became Tameh. Because not only it itself is Tameh, if you touch another piece of Terumah with this, what does the second Terumah piece becomes? Becomes a Shelishi Latuma. Right? Should we do this on a... Yeah, maybe. So we mentioned by Terumah you have Rishon, Sheni, and Shelishi. By Kodesh you have Rishon, Sheni, Shelishi, and Revi'i. So that's the extent of Tum'ah that they could have. So if a Terumah becomes Shelishi, now you touch another Terumah with it, what happens? Nothing. But if a Terumah becomes Sheni, then you touch another piece of Terumah with it, what does the second Terumah become? It becomes a Shelishi Latuma. So the first case that you have a Terumah that's Shelishi, we call that Terumah Pasul. It's Tameh, but it's a level of Tum'ah that can't pass its Tum'ah to another piece of Terumah. And therefore we call it a Terumah that's Pasul. But if a Terumah becomes Sheni Latuma, then it's not just Pasul, but it is Tameh. Right? Thank you. So that's the difference between the levels of Tum'ah. This is hard. This is locked.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, most of it. All of it, yeah.
Yeah, there it is. Good. So we have again, of course, we have the Ava Tum'ah. And then we have Rishon. Shelishi, and so these are the levels of Tum'ah. And again, the Chulin, they only could become Sheni. They can't become Shelishi. But Terumah could become Shelishi, and Kodesh could become Revi.
What about Master Shani?
Okay, so we'll get that. So this is a Terumah that became, if Terumah becomes Sheni, so then you have still a level left that could become Shelishi as well. So a Terumah that's here, if we have a Terumah that is Sheni Letumah, right? This Terumah we call it Tameh. But the Terumah that's here is Shelishi, which is Shelishi, we call it Pasul. This is just phraseology of Chazal, the way they said it. And again, it helps reading the read of the Mishnayot. It helps when you know the phraseologies that they use. So says the Gemara, Harabi Meir Harabanan, Ditnan Kol HaTa'un Biyad Ma'im Midivrei Sofrim Metameh et HaKodesh Uposel et HaTerumah. Anything that needs Biyat Ma'im Midivrei Sofrim, that needs, it basically is Sheni Latum'ah, right? If something is Sheni Latum'ah and you touch that to a Terumah, what does the Terumah become? Shelishi, which means Pasul, right? Again, a Sheni that touches a Shelishi, a Sheni that touches a Terumah, right? The Terumah goes one level down, it becomes Shelishi. So now the Terumah that Shelishi is Pasul because it can no longer make another teruma tameh. But if you have the same thing that needs biat mayim midrabanan, which means it's a sheni letuma, it's a level, second level. If this touches a kodesh, right? If this touches a kodashim, what would the kodesh be? No, the kodesh would be shalishi. But kodesh could go until revi'i. So if I have a kodesh over here, in the level of shalishi, if this would be kodesh, what would this be called? This would be tameh. Because if you touch it to another kodesh, it will make it a revi'i letumah, which would be still would be tameh. So therefore, if I have, let's imagine this is sheni letumah. If I touch this to a teruma, the teruma becomes pasul, which means it's tameh, but it's not metameh other things. It can't make other things tameh, other teruma tameh. But if this touches a kodesh, also the kodesh becomes shalishi. So regardless of what this touches, teruma or kodesh, the thing it touches becomes shalishi letuma, because it always goes one level down. So this is sheni. The next item that touches this is shalishi. The only thing is, this is just the wording that matters. So this shalishi letuma, if it's teruma, we call it pasul. If it's kodesh, we call it tameh. Pashut. This is simple, okay?
But this only applies for kodesh and above, right? The revi. This only applies for kodesh.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, teruma does not become revi. That's why if you touch this to the teruma only becomes pasul because it no longer could make another thing tameh because it doesn't go more than shalishi. Correct.
What about maser sheni? Does it go to sheni or does it go to shlishi?
Maser goes to the sheni also. So we'll discuss that.
Part of chulin,
yeah,
basically. Okay.
But it has its own stringencies, as we'll see. So says the Gemara. So it says it's not a kasha maser on maser because one of them is Rabbi Meir, one of them is Chachamim, and this is the Mishnah in Para that discusses it. That anything that is tameh and needs biat mayim, midivrei sofrim metameh et hakodesh uposel et hateruma. And then the Mishnah says, umutar lechulin ul maaser, but it is mutar for chulin and maaser. Divrei Rabbi Meir, v'chachamim osrin b'maaser, and Chachamim say it's asur for maaser. So it means that Rabbi Meir is over here arguing with Chachamim, and it differentiates between maaser. We're not talking about chulin now. Differentiates between maaser and teruma and kodesh, and the Mishnah says that for teruma and kodesh it becomes a problem, but mutar for chulin and maaser according to Rabbi Meir. And Chachamim, they say, is asur. So therefore, for Rabbi Meir, who is more lenient over here, he differentiates between maaser and says the Gemara, the suggestion of the Gemara is that the Mishnayot by us that says it's asur is talking about Chachamim who are more stringent, and by the Mishnah in Masechet Bikurim that says that they're different is Rabbi Meir who is more lenient. Now we'll see in just a moment that the Gemara is going to ask a question on this, and we're going to fall off of this and give a different answer, which B'ezrat Hashem will continue in the days to come.